The views and opinions expressed in the following podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the producers, the affiliates, or digital platforms hosting this podcast. All content is for the purposes of education, conjecture, and at times entertainment. We promote inclusiveness and diversity. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Into the Deep with Jay Costa.
Welcome to Into the Deep. I'm Jay Costa. The Mothman, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, Bigfoot. These are just some of the famous cryptids that have been the subject of so much speculation throughout history. Some are very mysterious, with no explanation for their existence, while others are a bit more familiar thanks to pop culture phenomena. And while whether or not cryptids exist, one thing is for sure: today's guest has made it a life mission to find out more. He's been a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM and has been featured on numerous television shows on Discovery, Animal Planet, Destination America, CBS, and more. Today's guest is Lyle Blackburn. He's the author of several acclaimed books, including The Beast of Boggy Creek, Texas Bigfoot, Sinister Swamps, Momo, and a myriad of others. Lyle also happens to be a host of a podcast himself called Monstro Bizarro and is the founder of the rock band Ghoultown. We talk about so much in this episode. We talk about Lyle's lifelong fascination with legendary creatures and strange phenomena. We talk about his band Ghoultown, his books, and so much more. So, join me as we seek light and journey into the deep with Lyle Blackburn. Enjoy. Lyle, thanks so much for joining me, man. I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Absolutely.
Well, I know who you are and I know what you've been up to, but if you wouldn't mind sharing for our viewers and our listeners who you are and what it is you do, my friend.
Well, my name is Lyle Blackburn, and I research unexplained creatures. I've always been into the subject of paranormal and specifically sightings of Bigfoot and things like that my entire life. And as an adult, I looked into it in a more serious fashion, sort of a investigative journalist approach. And I've written several books on the subject over the years. I suppose my most notable book is The Beast of Boggy Creek, which covers the infamous Legend of Boggy Creek Bigfoot case from back in the 70s. And since then, I've gone on to work with various documentary companies to produce documentaries on cryptids. I've been on shows like Monsters and Mysteries in America and The Unexplained and a whole bunch of others. And I also play in a rock band called Ghoultown. So I'm pretty busy all the time, but it's all good stuff, and I love it.
Right on, man. Sounds like you're living the life.
Living the dream, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love asking how people got on the trajectory to where they are today, but were these stories that you heard when you were younger and that you just wanted to get deeper into?
Yeah, I mean, as far back as I can remember, I just loved movie monsters and movies, horror movies and stuff. And that was my first kind of thing. But then at some point, I think around third grade, I got a book called Strange But True. And that had stories of Bigfoot and Yeti and Loch Ness Monster. And that was like mind blowing because okay, this is like real life monsters, so to speak. And I just became enthralled with those kind of reports. And along the way, of course, I love ghosts and, UFOs, anything that was mysterious and unexplained. And so, I was, I suppose, just a casual observer, reader, listener, watcher of those subjects through a lot of my life. And then later, just something that I had time to look into. And I've been a touring musician for many, many years, since my 20s. And I would just sit in the tour bus and read Bigfoot books and stuff. And I remember the guys were like, "What are you reading?" And so then I was working for the horror magazine Rue Morgue, and kind of their cryptid expert slash I knew a lot about cryptids in horror movies. And I just had this desire to write a book. So that's when I started working on The Beast of Boggy Creek. And it just was a fun process of interviewing people, looking into the case, learning about old reports, new reports, and actually going to these areas because I grew up hunting with my father, and that was a big part of sort of the monsters in the woods thing because, I loved the outdoors and all that. And I suppose pair that with the possibility of seeing something mysterious or unexplained or scary. I love those. So through that, I started looking into the possibility of, the reality of people seeing unexplained creatures and other paranormal stuff. And once the book came out, that sort of launched me onto a more serious focus into this. But it's always just come from that childhood fascination with the subject.
Right on. And during the process, like being a musician, did you feel there were any differences between like, trying to craft a song or creating an album compared to trying to write a book?
Well, in a way, there are similar in the process of the creation of something. I remember I was always good at writing, and I wrote for a few rock magazines and horror magazines, but there was not that instant gratification when you thought about writing a book. It was like, well, I can write a song and I could perform it at the very next gig, which could be this weekend or whatever, we could as fast as we could learn it. That seems cool, but a book, man, that just sounds like it's going to take forever. And then you're waiting for people to read it and feedback. But I've learned that's worth it, in the process of creating something that I'm passionate about, whether that's the music side or this case of a creature where people, credible people reported this and it may have transformed the whole entire town, that's now known for sightings. That was rewarding. And of course, once you get that first album or book out and you start to get feedback, especially if people appreciate it and like it, that just feeds the fire to continue those things, because I'm passionate about those sort of things. So they're a little bit different in the approach as the tools you use, but very much a creation of something that you put out there and then people can enjoy it.
Right on. It's a great point too, like being able to get to a point where with like I love the comparison you made with like a song, you can have it ready for the next gig and kind of almost get that instant feedback if people are digging it or if they're not, versus a book and putting that out, man. I love that comparison. So with that said, with your experience, did you feel like with that first book being out, like it kind of got you over that hump where it didn't matter? Like, okay, like I can do this, kind of like when you first were writing songs and you first saw the positive feedback coming from those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I kind of hit it at the right time, because The Beast of Boggy Creek came out in 2012 and I had been working on it for 2 or 3 years prior. I quickly got a publishing deal with Anomalous Books, which had published some of my favorite, uh, books on the unexplained. So it was like an honor to get onto that. And then very quickly after the book was out, it was on Coast to Coast Radio. I got calls from Finding Bigfoot and the Monsters and Mysteries in America show that was on, we'll say, Destination America at the time. They were covering the Boggy Creek case, and it just happened to be that I had put the book out, and suddenly I'm looked at as a guy who knows something about it, obviously. And those interviews helped. Obviously, it was a good platform. If you write a book, you want people to know about it, and then once that sort of started going on, I realized people were interested in it, because I kind of wrote the book because I wanted to know. I'd seen this movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek, which made this subject famous in the 70s, it was influential to me, but I kind of pursued the book just like I do with music. I do it first because I want to do it and I like to do it and I have the passion to do it. And second, to get any kind of accolades or what have you. So yeah, once the book came out, there's television calling. I thought, well, hell, this seems great. It's worth that work and the meticulous effort I put into researching and writing the book. And so that just, I could continue. And now I saw the process that, yeah, you do a lot of work, but at the end of the day, the feedback and it's worth it.
That's awesome. So what were some of the things that maybe going into your first book, you didn't realize, obviously you learned through the process, those things that you now apply every time you're writing a book or doing anything else?
Yeah, certainly just the collection of the data, the research to just how you organize it in the book. And that
Mm-hmm.
was one of the hardest parts is how do you display or arrange this information so that it's digestible and becomes a story because it is kind of in chunks because, this guy saw this Bigfoot like creature in this year. And then this year, this guy saw it. Oh, and there was a movie made. And then, all the processes, you have to interweave those so it's engaging and creates a narrative for the whole story instead of just being this sort of broken up thing. And that's the first thing I learned is to try to create a page turner. It's like, this was a dramatic sighting, but what came next would be like nothing else, which was true to the process of these incredible cases and tales, if you investigate them as a whole. So that once I kind of had that formula as how it laid out, it was easier to research the next book because I already had a vision of how all the parts and pieces would fit in that timeline. So it became more organized and a little more efficient at it, obviously, having done it once.
Right on. So in your opinion, do you feel like having that background in music and being able to write songs and over time, throwing, demo process, pre-production, and then finally what you do release as a musician, do you feel like that helped you apply that kind of same kind of ideology, I guess, with that creative process?
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, because there's a behind the scenes process before it becomes the final product. Yeah, the writing, the demo, and so forth. And it was the sort of a similar process to that ultimate end product. But what I really took away from the band was I already had a notion and I was good at, I guess, the marketing of it because you need a good album cover and you need to have, go do events, whereas you playing live, which turns on people to your music, you can't just write a book and then, I mean, you do have Amazon and the publisher, but really you're the best salesman. And it wasn't about the money per se, but it's like I worked like 3 years making this book. And I think it's an engaging case. And certainly anybody who's interested in, the unexplained, especially cryptids or Bigfoot, they're going to want to know this is like a famous piece of that history. And so you want people to want to read the book. So I remember I asked Anomalous, like, how much do you normally spend on a cover? And there was a very small amount. And I'm looking at the covers of the book and I'm like, why don't you just give me that and I'll pay for the rest because I know these really great artists that have done our album covers and other things. And so I got a really great cover and that certainly helped the book. I mean, endless. I mean, I'm sure that helped draw people in and it looked professional. So they kind of understood once I did this and I said, I know marketing. And then also I started contacting paranormal conferences, Bigfoot conferences, which at the time were really starting to kick in. And, to ask if I can be a speaker or show up and sell books. And so that part came from, the band marketing and doing a similar thing, and then again, the timing seemed right because over the years, the numbers of cryptid conferences and paranormal conferences and Bigfoot conferences. And there's almost so many, I can't do them all if I tried. There's just, I remember there's a few of them that I would ask. Now it's like, I can't even do them all. So that's a good thing.
Right. Good problem to have. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad that obviously this is happening. And, it's so funny because like, with the book, just like music, just like anything in art where like it's timing is everything. So to have that experience where like, especially with your first book coming out and people starting to kind of catch on. So I have to ask, especially with now what's happening right now, it seems like a lot of people are talking about, either talking about UFOs, UAPs, or they're maybe even talking about, quantum Bigfoots. So I have to ask, do you think, in your opinion, do you think it's flesh and bone? Do you think it's quantum? Do you think it's able to go in and out of dimensions?
Well, of course, I started where a lot of people did with the thoughts of Bigfoot as, it's some undiscovered species of ape or hominid that, there's small populations and that sort of thing. But, like with anything, the more information you gather and the more you know about the subject, you begin to either formulate other ideas or question what you first thought on your limited amount of info. And especially after interviewing so many hundreds of people firsthand, you say, well, there's something to this, but we can't prove it. And the longer it goes, I mean, we've had serious Bigfoot researchers going for more than 50 years. We still don't have, scientific proof of it. You have to say, well, if people are accurately seeing what they say they see, and we're still, even if there's small populations and all that, we still should be able to have some proof, or one gets run over by a truck, or anything. That's where these other theories start coming in, quantum Bigfoot and other things, where researchers have proposed that maybe they're not flesh and blood. Maybe they're, passing through our dimension or something, which would explain the sightings, yet, explain why we don't have proof. But I'm kind of split. I'm open-minded to all of it because I don't have all the answers. But one of the problems with portals and stuff is like, I can see the consistency of Bigfoot reports in places where that would make sense for a large, unidentified animal, if you will, creature to live, along, swampy areas, mountainous areas, heavily forested areas, riverways and things. They're not popping up like on my street here, near Dallas, Texas. So that to me, is hard to rectify. If they are just popping randomly, or we're seeing these visions, why wouldn't there be Bigfoot reports in suburban streets or something else? Same with other cryptids as well. But so, that kind of stuff just keeps this sort of a constant changing puzzle in which we're trying to fit the pieces into, but we really don't have all the pieces. We don't even have the picture that we're trying to make the puzzle out of. So I just kind of continue to operate without any grand notion of trying to prove it or anything. I just take one step at a time and go one case by case, and I enjoy that process. And even talking to somebody who describes seeing something that is just unexplainable, again, there's something to it, but I don't have all the answers.
Right on. I 100% agree and totally align with what you're saying too, because it's fascinating. You brought up a great point. Like, why aren't we seeing some sightings in like Deep Ellum, where someone's reporting like, hey, I just had this sighting, and it's, consistently in usually deep forested areas. So I love that point. So, and you brought up something else earlier, with all these, decades of research, sightings, recordings, do you think in your opinion, do you think we'll ever make contact? Do you think we'll ever have something tangible?
Well, I think so. And I think definitely early on when I was after having interviewed some really good witnesses, you're like, man, any day now. You kind of just think just any day, boom, there's a headline or somebody's going to come out with a video or whatever that they're standing there with one of these. And, I kind of thought about that a lot, but I think now it's sort of just almost that operates in the back of my mind where it's like, well, I kept thinking every day, but maybe we got to wait longer. And, it's just sort of something that I think could happen. I mean, some of this phenomenon, um, can reasonably be explained. Somebody can get a better than a blurry picture, at least. Maybe somebody finds a body or something, but I don't know. Again, it's like what I think is going to happen and how it goes down is two different things.
Fair enough. It's true. Because, we can hope for something, I mean, I never thought I'd see a day, growing up that, our own government would admit to UFOs or UAPs, to some
Yeah.
degree, So
Yep.
it's fascinating because we live in such like these times where like growing up, I remember, for me, like growing up in the 80s and seeing like so many different things, so many different movies and, having this fascination for cryptids and UFOs and all these stories. Did you ever think that we'd get to this point, as a culture even? Did you ever think that we'd be having these conversations so openly?
No, no, absolutely not. I mean, it was always just sort of to the fringe, with all of it. And of course, back or at some point, people were like thought of as crazy. It's like I didn't think they were crazy, but anybody who dared report seeing an alien or a UFO or a Bigfoot or or whatever, risk their reputation. So it is crazy to think that people are like lining up to go on TV, even to, finding Bigfoot or whatever. I saw something or all these UFO developments to where, yeah, I'm watching major news networks and we've gone from those newscasters who anytime in the past, they'd always have a snicker. They couldn't, they didn't want people to think, oh, I don't believe in this. Ha ha, we're running this story on UFOs. Well, now they kind of say, well, I've seen some of them say they believe in the possibility of extraterrestrial visitors. So yeah, it's mind blowing to live in a time when we've gotten this far with at least one of the phenomenons.
Right. And I hear different theories, especially now that it feels like people as a whole, are accepting extraterrestrial visitors or, the influence of extraterrestrials. And so I start thinking about different things. I start thinking about different cultures, different continents. We have the stories of Yeti and we hear different things about elongated skulls being found in South America and other parts. Do you feel like, in your opinion, do you feel like some of these are possibly left over from some sort of influence of extraterrestrials with what were here originally on what we call Earth?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely open to that. I remember watching that documentary Chariots of the Gods in the 70s, and that's where I first remember learning of this whole notion that our planet could have been visited by people from outer space. And of course, you think about that, and you're like, I don't know, it's such a huge jump. But as you begin to look at this and think about it rationally as an adult, you're like, we really don't exactly know these things. And as much as we think we know, or we're super smart or whatever, and we can make smartphones and other stuff, and we can fly to the moon, actually, we may not know as much as we think we do. And there are those pieces of unexplained parts of the puzzle that you can, you can take it in two different directions on the theories, but we really don't have a way to explain. And you're right. The more we see some things that are like, it just seems like some outer influence had made this rather than just some natural progression of our culture. I think that, if like Independence Day movie or whatever, if one day they just fly back here, we're just going to go, okay, yep,
There it is.
Now it all makes sense. And it's just like finding some guy popping on the news with a Bigfoot body. It may be just the same kind of thing as we turn on the news and they're reporting a spaceship hovering over New York, and you wouldn't be too surprised.
Which is fascinating because of what we were talking about earlier. Like there was a point in time, and especially I could tell both of our lives were like people who talked about that were crazy, tinfoil hat wearing, like, they're outlandish. And now it's like, I feel like these things are now public knowledge and people aren't talking about them enough.
Yeah. What's weird is people ask me sometimes, man, you're on these weird TV shows, you write these books about it. Does anybody ever hassle you about it or whatever? And I'm like, no. In fact, people always want to know, like, because, my band, we still play and tour, and fans will come up, and a lot of times instead of asking me about the band, they'll start asking me, what do you think about Bigfoot, man? And I'm thinking, this is crazy. People are truly interested in these things, and they may or may not want to share that online or make a post. I believe, but they are. And if they see somebody who they think knows something about it in person, man, they're asking questions and they're listening. So that shows that people do love these things, and especially with the recent stuff with the UFOs. I mean, everybody's kind of talking about it and talking about it pretty rationally, not with the snickers and all that. It's like, man, do you think,
Right. Which is wild because I never thought, like I said earlier, I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. I while I always was open to the possibility of it, I wasn't closed-minded to the fact that it wasn't a possibility. And, you bring up Chariots of the Gods, and like, what a eye-opening, moment for me to be able to like, okay, wait a minute, like this is plausible. This could be a thing. And that's why, going back to, Bigfoot and Sasquatch and like just the possibilities of it possibly being an interdimensional being. And if that's the case, hypothetically, I'd just love to know your opinion. If that were the case, what do you think Bigfoot or Sasquatch's message for humanity would be?
Well, if they have any intelligence, they're probably frowning upon us. I would think. I don't think we've been the greatest custodians of our planet, which I think people are starting to understand. We need to take more responsibility, and in a way, something like Bigfoot does represent a link between us and nature. Early on they called it the missing link or whatever, which is sort of not just an outdated concept, but there is sort of this symbolic representation of natural green earth with Bigfoot. And if Bigfoot creatures are coming here and they're traipsing around in our forest and our swamplands and our beautiful mountains, which seem to be disappearing or being overlogged and shrinking, and places where as a kid I played in the woods are now there's Home Depots and stuff there. And so I think if these these creatures come from any sort of planet where they have a better hold on the longevity and responsibility they have, they would certainly be, their message to us would be sort of like that movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, where the big gourd, stood out there. It's like, you better stop the nonsense or we're going to blow up your whole planet. Bigfoot, I don't know if it's that extreme, but yeah, certainly probably a message of take care of your planet so that we have some forests to come down here and roam around.
Right on. I love that. And it's interesting because, even I feel like different people that I've talked to, the overall consensus is that, like, when we think of like Bigfoot or Sasquatch, we think of like this green earth. We think of like this being that is part of something like the deep woods and the mountains, and something that's just so, out of a lack of better terms, just like so wholesome and organic in that way. So it's interesting that we have this, like, on some level of consciousness, we feel the same way about when we think about Bigfoot. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, I remember seeing it was probably like 10 years ago. They had some school supplies that were Bigfoot themed, and it was like leave no trace. And it was sort of this message of, the whole be green and reduce our carbon footprint and all that. It's really in the last few years gotten bigger, but it was kind of the seeds of that. And I remember thinking, wow, this is an appropriate connection. Whether Bigfoot turns out to be real or not, it represents something good in a way of that connection to nature and other things. So, and at the end of the day, when you research these things, I may do this for my whole entire life and have no proof, whether I offer it or anybody else. So you want to feel like, first, you're sharing these stories, which are, I think, important to collect and to document. But, you feel like it represents something that's a positive thing. It's not, I talk about the scariness of the sightings, and I like the spooky aspect of all of it, but in many ways, it can be looked at as positive. And if, using Bigfoot just to get kids out in the woods, you tell, put down the phones, we're going to go hiking. They're like, whoa, hey, we're going to go looking for Bigfoot. Somebody said they saw one down here. Well, they're ready to go, So it can be used in a positive way to where no matter what the outcome is with these mysteries, that you feel like you've had time well spent.
I love that. And definitely brings me back to my youth, where, like, between my dad and my uncles, talking about either Bigfoot or pirates or, anything to just kind of get the imagination going. And, it's funny because I remember playing with toys that didn't just do everything for you. You used your imagination to play with these toys, or I'd be with buddies and we'd go out in the woods and we'd like create these whole different scenarios and stories in our mind of what we were doing and what we're building. And it's fascinating. And, you brought up a great point about getting away from the phones, getting out to the woods. And, we're seeing more and more studies where people they're healed by nature if they spend more time in nature. And then I can't help but think of, we talked about a little bit earlier, of just thinking as, of Bigfoot and Sasquatch as this like figure, and like the, hey, leave no trace behind. And like thinking about, like, what if this iconic figure is waiting for this, hypothetically waiting for this like perfect time to reveal itself, when maybe we're ready as a culture.
Right. I mean, that would be amazing. And again, like whether it's a UFO landing or this just sort of elderly, wise Bigfoot comes out and said, however he communicates, and yeah, it says, we're like, okay, yeah, this is real, and it would be a complete wake up call. Any of this stuff, like if a Bigfoot walked out into the open, or we had an alien body or a visitor. I mean, everything we, again, think we know, it would just suddenly flip on its head, because then these things become all the way from things people talked about in stories and hush hush or legends into something that now we have to assimilate into what we believe about everything else. So yeah, that's really cool. That's kind of a cool image. Just this huge Bigfoot walking out one day. It says, okay, here's the deal.
Right? Man, that'd be awesome. Oh, like I live up in the Northeast, so there's a lot of tales of like the Bridgewater Triangle and like Thunderbird sightings and Pudgewudgies and a lot of paranormal activity happening within the Bridgewater Triangle. And there's always this correlation between the indigenous that were here, the early First Nations people, and these beings. Do you find that in other parts of the country as well?
Yes, a lot of times you do. Any stories of creatures we have now, you can pretty much look back in Native American stories or tales and find reports of similar things. They're obviously not going to call it a Bigfoot or a Pukwudgie, but you go, well, hairy giant, forest people, lost hairy tribe. I mean, sounds like Bigfoot. And I think you always have that basis, which almost gives some more plausibility and credibility to it, because if these things exist now, then certainly they would have been here all along. And therefore, those people who were even more immersed in the woods and the swamps and places would have had interactions and stories. So yeah, I wrote a book called Sinister Swamps, where I covered notorious swamps around the country that had long histories of all sorts of manner of paranormal strangeness. And the Bridgewater Triangle was certainly there with Hockomock Swamp. And that's one that has a very strong connection to like the Pukwudgie, like you said, and Native American tales of this trickster kind of diminutive creature. Fast forward, now you've got people coming across something and describing it in similar ways. And according to these witnesses, they had never heard the Native American tales. So this, the correlation between the two, only when they saw the creature and then started trying to do research did they then realize that there had been previous stories. And a similar case in my Lizard Man book, where I talk about a case from South Carolina. Lo and behold, people in 1980s are describing this upright reptilian type humanoid creature. The Native Americans in that same area had stories of this race of sort of scaly humanoids that they said came from the sea. Well, I can tell you that the people who saw what they reported as a lizard man in 1988 had no idea about these Native American stories, because they're just not something they're not taught in school, and you'd have to really be reading up on literature and studying to even know. So again, that's very coincidental that you have a tradition of it and then modern reports of pretty much the same thing.
Which is so fascinating to me because, I feel like there's these stories that have been in place, oral traditions passed on, and that there are some communities that are far more in touch with some of those oral traditions from the, First Nations people. But then there's other areas that are, like you said, they're not aware of some of these stories, and yet they're having these experiences. They're seeing these things that can be related to what's been talked about.
Right. Yeah. And certainly if you do talk to First Nations people, they will tell you, usually matter of factly, oh yeah, we know all about this. Like you folks are way behind, and like we probably are, but it's their stories and connections with these are different. And again, it's like a cultural perspective of where they're coming from, and what what has been acceptable for them to talk about in the ways they talk about it, because a lot of they framework these in ways we don't normally, a lot of it they imbued a spirituality to the creatures, and they existed somewhere between mythological things and things that, we know that a crow exists, and they would see um, a lot more to the crow, or for example, or whatever. And yeah, and so those connections with people who um, are closer to the land and have these experiences have those great stories, which again, kind of, if we take this at face value, they lend credibility to the fact that people have been seeing stuff like this all along. It's just how you described it, what cultural framework and what name you gave it, but essentially the same descriptions.
Right on. And that brings me to thinking about what, like, talking about like Texas Bigfoot, where people might not necessarily hear about it all the time, but there's stories, there's sightings. And so walk me through, talking about Texas Bigfoot, for those who might not even be aware, people don't realize there are forests in Texas as well. There's a lot in, I love Texas, one of my favorite states. And it's fascinating because when I talk to my friends and we talk about different sightings or whatever, these come up and people don't realize. So did you feel like it was a personal mission because you were, from Texas, that, hey, I got to share these stories?
Yeah, I think it did become like I'm the guy that needs to write this book type of thing, because when I was young, I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, the very essential cowboy town. I got pictures of me in a cowboy hat when I was like 3. So it was just, this is just normal stuff. And going hunting with my father, I didn't hear any Bigfoot stories, at the time when I was really young. So I had no idea there had been sightings in Texas. But like you say, people have a misconception about what Texas is. You kind of think of that Fort Worth cowboy, cattle drives, and all that kind of stuff. And certainly you have lands that are more like something out of a John Wayne movie or whatever. And as you go west, it's more arid, as you get towards New Mexico. But the eastern third of the state is very heavily forested, piney hardwood habitat. We even have swamps here. And, in those areas, it is like prime Bigfoot habitat. And that's where the majority of the sightings have taken place over the years. And when you go into this environment, I remember when I was a kid, we had family that lived in East Texas. When I first drove from our sort of more sparsely treed area into that, I was like, wow, this is like another planet or something. And and of course, as I started looking into these subjects, I collected more and more stories about sightings in Bigfoot in Texas, whether those were old newspaper reports, fellow investigators logging these, or just interviewing people myself. And it began to amass so much history that I'm like, no one's ever written a book specifically on sightings just in Texas, which it's a huge state, and there's a lot that I thought, it's just something I should do. And we have a Texas Bigfoot conference that takes place every October in East Texas. So I'm like, I'm at this conference every year. Why don't I have that book? And I got the cowboy hat and the credibility of being a native Texan. So yeah, I was happy to put that together. And I credit a lot of my colleagues that were collecting stuff even before me to document something that's really, some of the first stories go back to the 1800s in old newspaper reports and things like that, to where this isn't just something of a modern phenomenon. There had been stuff going on all along.
That's such a great point. Like, thinking about some of these sightings, and when like it's in newspaper articles, way back, a couple hundred years ago, people are talking about these things. So clearly, something's going on. I don't feel like something would just be this. I mean, I could be wrong, but having these articles, same thing with in the Northeast where they were, when printing became relevant and people were printing these stories of sightings of different things. So being down in Texas and having all of this information and putting it out, and did you ever get any flack for it? For like you know, I've never seen anything, so it's not real.
Yeah, I mean, you run across a few people like that will, dismiss it out of hand, or have a preconceived idea. Usually I like those, especially if it's in person. If somebody, yeah, I mean, because then I can very rationally throw out a few stories and things and from my experience that they'll be like, really? Like, yeah, just think about it for a second. Just get rid of the pop culture Bigfoot and let's talk about hunters and people in the woods and some of these stories. And I can tell you maybe one by somebody I've interviewed. That there's tracks that have been found here, and they usually people aren't aware of that kind of stuff. So I don't try. I understand very much skeptical people. I mean, I totally get it. I mean, I know some people, especially if you've seen a Bigfoot or a ghost or whatever, it's easy for you to say, well, look, it's totally real. You just don't get it. But people need to see, and this is a stretch. So it's something you have to accommodate their skepticism. So, but I find that you do, and if you can identify with that person, say, look, I totally get it. I mean, it seems crazy or ridiculous, but let me throw you a few facts, and I'm not trying to sell you. I'm just telling you, this is stuff that's happened. Usually they'll be like, yeah, well, my uncle did say something one time. You saw, and then suddenly they feel comfortable to share something. So I think those people that dismiss it out of hand, they just don't have enough information, or so they need a book like Texas Bigfoot, and hopefully they would even entertain it to know more about the subject.
Right on. So when people ask you in those conversations, or maybe they're trying to pick your brain or whatever, I guess in your opinion today, because I love the fact that you're so open-minded about everything, but in your opinion today, in your words, what do you think Bigfoot is?
Well, it is a hard one, because the more you know, the less you know, it seems like. To me, I mean, I still kind of go back to my sort of initial view that they're some sort of terrestrial creatures, possibly a species of great ape that has managed to go undetected, and which the longer it goes, the harder that is to explain. But I think one thing we have to realize is there's a lot of Bigfoot reports and stuff, but we can't accept that every single one is just that. There can be room for error, misidentification. These are often very quick glimpses, and people are interpreting what they've seen on just seconds and very limited information. So I think there's a lot less of these things, and less perhaps sightings than we perceive. There's a lot of them, but these span over 100 years, and there it could be something that could remain elusive in parts of this country that we think seems supernatural. But I mean, animals are equipped. That's what they do, is survive and evade us and live where we can't. And I think it's possible. That being said, I mean, the longer it goes, the more I have to be open-minded about other possibilities. That, again, if we say people are seeing something that they're describing, then I'm not sure. I don't want to say there's interdimensions or they're from outer space or whatever, but there's certainly could be more to it that we just simply don't understand enough about our world, not just for Bigfoot, but sightings of other things and other phenomenon, that, you know, disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle, which, probably not aliens abducting people, but there's some phenomenon going on over there that doesn't exactly fit neatly into our scientific paradigm. And that could very well be for Bigfoot as well. So I'm open-minded, but I kind of just am that sort of like, I'm still that little kid who just loves Bigfoot in the woods. Man, it's this giant ape thing. And, sometimes it runs across the road. Sometimes it's attacking people. It's spooky and crazy and cool. And maybe I'll see one. And I've even had some possible sightings. So that just keeps me fueled, is that childhood wonder about what it is, and less about trying to explain something I don't see in front of me right now.
Right on. That's awesome. And have you had any sightings or possible sightings that you think?
Yes. Over the years, there's been a number of things that have happened. Owls, something running just out of sight. And this has happened from Florida, Texas, Arkansas. The best sighting incident came from the Boggy Creek area up in Arkansas, and this was only a couple of years ago, and it was a place where we've heard howls. Something kind of stalked us in the woods. We found footprints, but on one afternoon, I was down there in this low bayou area called Mercer Bayou, and I caught sight of just sort of like movement in the trees about 70 yards across this bayou channel. And I looked, and I thought, was that the leaves moving in the wind, or did I see something? And as I was looking literally in that area, I saw this large kind of reddish orange something walk across between two trees, which a lot of foliage and obscured. So I saw it for, just a couple of seconds and was like, what was that? It was huge. And it's a place where you can't walk to because there's a bayou channel there with alligators and stuff. I would never walk through there. No one else would down there. You have to have a boat to get to the other side. And the property is part of this Sulphur River Wildlife Management Area. And in all the years, I've been going down there like 12, 13 years, I've never seen another person over there. It's not private land. There's nobody, there's no hikers. This place is remote as it is. So that being said, I couldn't get across there at the time because we were there, but we didn't have a boat. And we came back and tried to sort of estimate the distance and how big it would be and all that. And while I didn't see it well enough to say 100%, the thing is I just prior to that, I'd been in this little town, Fouke, and was talking to one of the locals at a store there. And he said he had seen what he believed was the creature. He said it ran across the road in daylight. And he said it looked reddish in color. He said it kind of looked like an orangutan. That was exactly what he said. And I kid you not, 20 minutes later, I saw this reddish thing walk through the woods just south of where his sighting had been. Well, his sighting had been some months earlier. So that was, just another like tidbit of like excitement that keeps you on the trail of these unexplained monsters.
Wow. Oh, right on, man. So, do you have any new books you're working on currently, or any new films that you're working on currently?
A few things. There's always something going on. I've been pushing my own podcast, which is called Monstro Bizarro, which is more of a narrative type thing where I examine cases rather than an interview type thing, which has taken up some time to develop that last year. I just narrated a film for Small Town Monsters, which is a film company out of Ohio that does a lot of these cryptid documentaries. I just narrated a Chupacabra movie that will be released, I guess, imminently. And just got back from the Boggy Creek area filming an episode of a very popular television show on the History Channel. So probably shouldn't say too much, but it's a good one. And again, it features the legend of Boggy Creek, just like so many years ago when I got those calls. It's still, still going and the ball's rolling. And so those are exciting things that they just continue to advance the story and, talk about, how cool these things are.
Right on. I love that. Anything going on for Ghoul Town, your band? Anything happening?
Yeah, actually, we just released a best of sort of album, Best of the Dead West, for people. We've been around for quite a number of years, so a lot of people come and go, where do I even start? Especially people that come to my cryptid events and may not have followed the band until they heard of me. So yeah, we put together that, and that's got some bonus tracks, brand new material that literally just came out a couple of weeks ago. And we're doing some tour dates in the Southeast. We're doing in late October, we're doing like Memphis and Nashville, Atlanta, Dayton, South Carolina. So that's a lot of stuff coming up in October, including some other appearances. I'll be at a Goatman Festival in Kentucky, October 13th, 14th, and other things. So always busy times.
Right on. Yeah. I would imagine busy month for you, busy month for anybody dealing with the unexplained.
I know they always say, hey, I was thinking, it's October. We were thinking of getting you. Can you come to this conference? I'm like, yeah, you want to book that next year because everybody wants this month.
Right. Yeah. You got to plan it out ahead. Give me a year's notice on this.
Right. This is like Christmas for paranormal people, man.
Right. Oh, man. Well, it's awesome. Lyle, I can't thank you enough for taking some time and your space and your energy to be on the show, man. George and I can't thank you enough. This has been awesome, man. Where can people find you on the internet, brother?
So, the best place to find info is on my website, lyleblackburn.com. Of course, my books are available on Amazon as well. Ghoul Town Music is available everywhere finer music can be found, on iTunes and Spotify. And likewise, my podcast is on all those platforms as well, Monstro Bizarro. So just hit my lyleblackburn.com and you can go from there down the rabbit holes.
And there you have it. I can't thank Lyle enough for his time, his space, and his energy. Be sure to check out Lyle's band, Ghoul Town, as well as his podcast, Monstro Bizarro. Hit the link below in the description. You can also find Lyle at lyleblackburn.com. Hopefully you've taken a moment to hit that like button, maybe even hit that notification bell so you can find out about new episodes coming out. Thank you so much for following us on this journey. George and I can't thank you enough. So, until next time, take care of one another and keep thinking for yourself.